Can you keep a secret?
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Changing Hearts and Minds, a show about reviving the warrior spirit and remembering the past to improve our future. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick. Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I totally screwed or what? You're funny.
I want to discuss all this behavior.
Let me out of here!
Hey, good afternoon, guys. This is Jeff, coming to you live from Fayetteville, North Carolina. And that's about as radio as I get. Today, we got a really good episode for you guys with the D-Day invasion anniversary, June 6th coming around or just passing, depending on whenever this episode gets released. We decided today that we're going to bring you guys a historical story of significance that has to do with that day itself, especially since the importance of it to me is very high because I was a Ranger. First, let me talk to you about who we've got on the show to help me do this episode. We have got Andrew McDowell on. Andrew is a lifelong resident of Massachusetts. He was born and raised just outside of Boston, and being a New York Yankees fan or New York Giants fan, I'm fairly certain that Andrew is having more of an issue being on the phone with me than I am with being on the phone with him, since my baseball team has 27 World Series victories, and my New York Giants have beat his Boston Patriots. I'll say Boston Patriots because that's what they are. They've beaten them twice out of the 2 times they should have won. So no big deal.
How many this decade? Any this decade?
No, that's not what I said, though. I mean, the only one that matters is the one where you guys went undefeated. You know, was it 18 wins and 1 giant loss?
19-0, my friend.
Sure. He was born and raised just outside of Boston. Among other interests, he's a passionate outdoorsman, and we'll be hosting a podcast here on the Change Your POV podcast network called Neophyte in the Woods. And neophyte doesn't mean that you're going to go into the Matrix and pick a brawl with, Keanu Reeves. That's not neophyte. Neophyte is some really smart person term for new guy. Andrew, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Andrew is in the middle of getting ready to move, and his wonderful wife, who's definitely his better half,
yes,
is getting ready to have a baby. So, hey, congratulations, man, on having a kid.
Thank you.
It's your first child, right?
Yep, and I'm completely in over my head already. I have no idea what I'm going to do.
You have no idea what's coming your way, buddy. No idea. You hear all these stories about war and combat. You think that's bad, but you're having a little girl, right?
Yeah, little girl. I'm getting paid
you
back
you poor son of a bitch.
I'm totally screwed.
You're totally screwed. Andrew, he's an intense lover of all things American history, guys. His first historical fascination was our topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is the Allied landings on Normandy on June 6th of 1944. And since this is my show, and I was in 2nd Ranger Battalion, we're going to talk about 2nd Ranger Battalion and their part in the D-Day invasion, which argumentatively could have been one of the, probably maybe the, or one of the most important missions that occurred that day. You think so, Andrew? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, hindsight being 2020, the plot twist down the road, I won't discuss in case anybody wants to be surprised, but it's one of those missions that you have to run on the off chance that the intelligence is actually correct.
Obviously, for those of you who already know, we are talking about the mission on Pointe Du Hoc. Pointe Du Hoc is the American way they say it. Being a French speaker, I would say Pointe Du Hoc. But I'm not going to say that because I'm an American and I really want to irritate the Patriots fan from Boston. So I'll say Pointe Du Hoc. No need for all the angry emails about how my mispronunciation is it. I do parlez-vous français, and you can, vous et vous désirez mon cornichon. And for those of you who know French, I did just tell you to eat my pickle if you don't like it. So
I speak no French at all, so let's go with the American pronunciation.
Fantastic.
It'll make me feel more comfortable anyway.
Fantastic. And last time I checked, the Americans were the ones saving everyone's ass in Europe.
Yeah.
So we'll go with the American statement right now. So let me go ahead and set the stage for you guys, all right? It's June 1944. After 4 years of war, the Allied forces commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, not Montgomery. Montgomery was passed over for Eisenhower, and we can argue that another day, but Montgomery was passed over, and Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander. They're getting ready to begin Operation Overlord. Now, Operation Overlord is the military code name for what becomes known as the D-Day invasion of Europe. I will continue to call it D-Day from this point forward, but just so you know, the name of the operation was Operation Overlord. The invasion of Europe by the amphibious and airborne assault into the areas of France known as Normandy. Normandy is not a city, as some people would think. Normandy is actually a region of France. The Nazis are not oblivious to the fact that they're about to get invaded, all right? So they have spent the last few years, and this is, we're going back to 1944, they've spent the last few years building up defenses along the coastline of Normandy. And this defense that they built along the coastline of Normandy is known by the Germans and then eventually by everyone else is called the Atlantic Wall. A report to Adolf Hitler in October of 1943 regarding the weak defenses in France led to the appointment of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, well known as the Desert Fox, to oversee the construction of further fortifications along the expected invasion front, which stretched from the Netherlands all the way down to Cherbourg. It was about 2,400 miles of coastline that they were defending, and also that 2,400 of coastline that they knew was going to be the point of invasion when the invasion finally did kick off. Rommel believed that the Normandy coast could be a possible landing point for the invasion, so he ordered the construction of extensive defensive works along the shore. In addition to concrete gun emplacements at strategic points, he ordered wooden stakes, metal tripods, mines, large anti-tank obstacles to be placed on the beach to delay the approach of any landing craft and to impede the movement of tanks on the shores. He expected the Allies to land at high tide so that the infantry would spend less time exposed on the beach, so he ordered many of these obstacles to be placed at the high tide markers so that his guys could identify high tide and be ready, and also so that they wouldn't be missed when the high tide rose above all the different hazards that they put out there. They put tangles of barbed wire, booby traps, removed all the ground cover made, giving no defilade for any of the approaching hazards, making the entire open field a giant, massive dead zone for any infantry forces that tried to move across it. It is actually, where we're going to be talking about today, is located 4 miles south of Omaha Beach, between Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. That is where Pointe Du Hoc is. Now, Pointe Du Hoc was a prominent cliff top that oversaw most of the entire span of the planned Allied Amphibious Force landing zone, and the amphibious landing portion of the mission was known as Operation Neptune. So as everyone knows, that when we invaded during D-Day, we had a massive amphibious assault along Normandy. We also had this giant airborne operation. They separated those two different operations into two separate names. We are going to be focusing on Operation Neptune, which obviously Neptune, being the god of the ocean, was the amphibious assault portion, and that's what we're going to be talking about. The entire suspected amphibious landing zone was a giant risk for the Germans, and so the Germans wanted to make sure it was a humongous obstacle for the Allied forces to get over. So they picked the highest point in the area, which was Pointe Du Hoc, to place their biggest defensive weapons facing down upon the beaches. All right, they had 6 German encasements. Now the German encasements are, if you see a lot in these movies like Band of Brothers or Longest Day, you will see these big giant circular areas that are dug out and they're kind of sunken down a little bit. They look like a crater and they've got like a metal ring around them and like gear inside of them. Those are what's called an encasement. And inside those encasements, they had guns. They had 6 of these 155 millimeter guns. They were pointed directly at the beaches on both Omaha and Utah Beach. Now, just so we're clear, Omaha and Utah Beach is not the actual name of the beaches, all right? They were the code names given by the Americans, and over the years they have just become commonly referred to as Omaha and Utah Beach. I'm pretty sure, since I've been to France and I've been to the coastline there, that even the locals there call them Omaha and Utah.
Can I just interject something here that I thought was interesting
right
while I was doing some reminder? I was listening to and reading about this, and I think it's, for me at least, one of the cool kind of quirks of history is that Rommel ended up becoming so obsessed with the Atlantic Wall and dumping so much focus on it. I mean, he was the guy in North Africa who was fire maneuver, blitzkrieg, like he was entirely focused on maneuver warfare. And then he gets the assignment of, defending basically Europe, and all of a sudden he becomes absolutely obsessed with concrete and rebar.
Well, that was part of the problems, as we'll get into later on. The Nazi supply lines started to dwindle on Rommel, as time went on, and he was unable to get the concrete that he needed and all the stuff that he needed to give better defensive placement for his soldiers that were all along the coastline. Not to mention the fact, guys, and this won't be said later, but I wanted to mention it right now. It was not lost on the Americans how important Rommel was to the Germans, and so they waited till Rommel was on leave to actually have D-Day go down. And the Germans, it was just a massive oversight by the Germans to not expect that the Allies would invade when Rommel was on vacation. And it's a true story because Rommel was undefeated. Fairly certain he was undefeated up until Patton beat him in Africa.
Yep.
And so he was a massive hero. He would be the world that time period's Robert E. Lee, where he was almost unbeatable and just brilliant tactician. Most American generals ran tactics based on books that Rommel wrote.
Tanks and Attack. I mean, Rommel's seminal work on offensive tank maneuver warfare.
Right, and a famous part of the movie Patton is when Patton's screaming at Rommel across the battlefield, "Rommel, you magnificent bastard! I read your book," as he's beating him, and that's a true story. That's actually verified that he was standing on the side of the battlefield, yelling at Rommel across that you can't, I can beat you because I read your book. I know everything you know. Because he respected him so much, and he was world renowned. I mean, he also, as we go into it later on, this not to get off topic too much, but Rommel was not a standardized member of the Nazi Party. Rommel was a war general, a field marshal in the German army, but he was a general in the German army before the Nazis took over. Yep. He joined the Nazi Party more out of a sense of self-preservation. And he was definitely dedicated to the superiority and the pushing of the German society, but he was one of the guys who was found guilty of being part of one of the plans to assassinate Hitler.
He was forced to commit suicide.
Forced to commit suicide by the Germans, as opposed, and rather than go take the hard way out, which was to get thrown inside those camps. Which probably would have happened to him if not just brought out in front of mass public. Hitler didn't really treat his people he thought were traitors very, very good. It wasn't like he just threw you in jail for a couple months. He didn't give you the you can go to jail, become a woman and I'll let you out thing that we do nowadays. That was a joke, Andrew.
Yeah, I know.
Well, if you don't laugh, then everyone else thinks I'm just offensive. And if you think I'm offensive, I don't care. I mean, let's be honest. The guy went to jail, became a girl, and then they let him out. I mean, if I commit massive treason, I think I'll just tell everyone I want to be a girl and see if I can get out of prison.
Be an interesting experiment.
Right. So back to the storyline. So Rommel, obsessively designed these plans to stop the Allied invasion. For all intents and purposes, it was a great plan. Because these guns that were atop Pointe Du Hoc, that were the highest point in the area that could shoot down onto Omaha and Utah Beach, they were a massive problem for the planning process for the Allies. It became a point of focus inside their planning meetings during what's called the Trinidad, or the I think it was called the Triad or the Trinidad planning phase that was the name that it was given. But they would spend months and months talking about what do we do about Pointe Du Hoc, these 6 guns that are up there. And they would fly over and bomb them incessantly, but they were never able to actually get these guns to go away. The guns posed a direct and mission-threatening danger to the Allied landing. And what that means, guys, is massive amounts of loss of life, up to and including a possible failure. Think Bay of Pigs failure. And if we'd not been able to get on ground in Europe, it would have been very, very bad for the war effort, because it was a perfect timing for us to get in there when the Russians were pushing on the Germans one side. We were going to get in there and get on the other side. If we were not able to get a foothold, we were going to have real big problems. And Mother Nature apparently wasn't working along with us, because they had put off the invasion 2-3 times because of weather. And it just so happened that they got a good weather report the day before they were going to go in there. Because of the threat, during the planning process, it was decided that ground force assault had to be done to ensure the destruction of the guns, and it had to be made a priority as the chance of air bombing did not fully disable the guns and could lead to catastrophic loss of life and possible failure to gain a foothold in that Atlantic wall. The Allied forces would need a very specialized unit of individuals willing to take on a high risk and be ready to do whatever it took to ensure mission success. enter the U.S. Army Ranger. 4 years earlier in 1940, the British military established the Royal Commandos, which was a light infantry special operations force that performed raids successfully against the Axis forces up and down this Atlantic wall. These British commandos had a lot of experience over those 4 years, hitting these small little raid targets along the coastline, getting in, getting out very quickly, right? The U.S. really liked that idea. So when the U.S. entered the war, they discussed directly with the British and decided that the U.S. force should also establish its own commandos, mimicking the commandos unit. And Rangers wasn't a word that was new to the military at the time. There's been Rogers Rangers and Rangers throughout the years in the military. There wasn't an established Ranger unit at the time, so they used that name and they created the U.S. Army Rangers. And in June 1942, the Rangers were established as a special operations light-equipped raiding unit. They were based into battalions, and these battalions consisted of six companies of 65 men. Each company was lightly equipped rather than the standardized 4-company, heavier-equipped regular infantry battalions that the U.S. Army had. These Ranger units were trained directly by the British commandos to attack with speed and aggression, and these guys were motivated by a savagely high esprit de corps. The commander of this unit, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, was a man named Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder. He commanded the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which was the unit that actually hit Pointe Du Hoc. This man was known to have extreme leadership presence. He came from Texas. Before the military, he was a college football coach, and he used that college football coach ability to instill confidence, preparing his men through very highly physical training and environmental conditioning. I mean, he had his Rangers train for the Pointe Du Hoc mission by scaling cliffs all along the English coast. He had the guys taken out to the Isle of Wight for like months and months beforehand, and he would just take them around the Isle of Wight and stop and be like, that cliff right there, go ahead and climb it. And it was intended to build confidence in the task that they were going to be doing, and to make the Rangers very fast getting up the cliff sides, because if they weren't able to get up these cliff sides quickly, these guys were going to get stuck on these cliffs and they were going to get chewed to pieces. So they wanted to lower the time that it took them to get up these cliffs, because they knew they were going to have to do it in combat. So having said that, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing about the speed and aggression of getting up the cliffs was that the beach at the point was like 10 meters wide at low tide, and the water went all the way up to the very base of the cliff at high tide. So if they weren't off the beach, they were going to drown, basically. I mean, there was no getting off.
Right. We understood, we said earlier that the Germans expected the Americans to come at high tide. So during low tide, 2 things were the advantage. A, it was not when the Germans expected, and there was intelligence that the Americans knew that the Germans were expecting a high tide assault, so they planned to do it at low tide. But also, specifically for that, these Germans had absolutely no plan for the Allied forces to come at Pointe Du Hoc from the water side. They thought that Pointe Du Hoc was going to get assaulted from the land side. So all of their major defenses, as far as their frontal infantry-type defenses at Pointe Du Hoc, were faced inland. They thought they would hit the beaches, come up and around, and hit Pointe Du Hoc from the backside, which to them they thought was a great plan for them, because they would just use those guns to rain down on top of the Americans. Little did the Americans know that because of all the bombing that has been going on, there was something that they did with the guns, which will, again, we don't, no spoiler alerts yet. We'll get into that later. So, Andrew, let's talk a little bit about the enemy situation at Pointe Du Hoc,
Sure.
and we'll talk a little bit about the Germans and what did they have at Pointe Du Hoc and what was going on up top on that cliffside.
Sure. So the Germans had kind of the beaches at Normandy were right on the edge of 2 different army groups. Where the Allied troops ended up attacking was one army group, and just the other side of a river was another one. So that was planned. There's confusion at the edges. The main defense of of Omaha and Pointe Du Hoc was by the 352nd German Infantry Division. Specifically at the point was the 914th Grenadier. Going back kind of to the higher level there, the 352nd was formed in France in late 1943, November, and originally commanded by a guy named Dietrich Kreis, I think is the name pronounced. I don't speak German, so we'll go American style again.
Well, we did win the war. That's why we don't.
We did win the war.
Had we not won the war, we'd all be speaking German right now. So
exactly. So we're going to go with the American pronunciation. The division was originally slated to be deployed to the Eastern Front, owing to the kind of the extreme losses that the Germans had faced during the advance to the gates of Moscow and then the subsequent retreat. But the knowledge of that the Allies were going to invade Europe at some point really scuttled those plans. Despite the fact that the 352nd was a relatively new division, it wasn't green by any stretch of the imagination. It was formed from a mix of veteran troops from disbanded or understrength units who had fought heavily in the East. So there was a very strong kind of backbone of veteran troops who had seen combat.
Oh, I
but
can
it
imagine
also had
those guys that were fighting the Soviets at the time. Those were hardened warriors. I mean, you survived the Soviet battles. You knew what you were doing.
exactly, and and they really had no illusions about what they were facing. And these were the guys that kind of put some steel into the backbone of the other troops there, who were either conscripts, so they were 17-year-old kids, pulled out of Brandenburg and said, here's a rifle, have fun. Or they were what they call Ost Battalion troops. So these were actually soldiers that were Polish or Russian or Lithuanian or Norwegian who were captured and then forced into German service.
Yeah, kind of
So
like
these guys,
like you can go fight for us, or you can go to the camps, which
exactly.
obviously you're going to say, hey, at least maybe if I'm fighting, I can maybe get away. At the camp, there's no getting away.
Exactly. And actually something that I discovered that was kind of interesting was after D-Day was over and the kind of the fighting had temporarily moved inland, they were interrogating prisoners, and there were two men with Asiatic features who nobody spoke the language of. Turned out that they were Korean. They had been captured by the Japanese, forced into the Japanese army. The Japanese were fighting the Russians captured them. They were then in turn captured by the Germans and sent to the Atlantic Wall and were in turn captured by the Americans.
Wow,
So
that is one hell of a summer off from college, huh?
I was going to say, I mean, and it's not unreasonable to think that they were returned to Korea and then were conscripted during the Korean War because they were of an age that they weren't so old that they weren't going to get forced into either the North or South Korean army, but they weren't so young that they were going to bounce and go somewhere else.
Just to think about that in the comedic aspect. I mean, how bad of a karma did you have in your last life to
Right?
have to go to the Atlantic Wall, probably face Patton at some point, and then get shipped off to Korea and have to face the other maniac American, General MacArthur? I mean, you really got no luck when you're going to be at the boot heels of those two guys.
You done fucked up.
You done,
I think is the best.
You done fucked up.
Yep. So that's just an interesting factoid that all credit to Stephen Ambrose who dug that one up in an interview when he was writing his D-Day book. So that was pretty interesting.
Great author.
By and large, I think the best pure historian and teller of stories I think out there.
Yeah, definitely teller of stories. For historical aspect, I would argue that Shelby Foote would probably be the greatest historical guy,
yep.
But the greatest guy telling stories, I would agree with you there. That I think Stephen Ambrose is probably the greatest storyteller of of wartime. So, all right, well, let's keep us going, man. What else you got there? Are we done with the enemy situation?
Yeah. So again, 914th Grenadier Regiment was the main body of troops who were up on the top of Pointe Du Hoc, about to face our heroes.
And they were started by Dietrich Krauss, but if I remember correctly, they were commanded at the time by Mr. Colonel Ernest Hyena, which is not really his name was Henya, but Hyena sounds good because it sounds like an asshole. I mean, he was a Nazi, so we'll call him an asshole. So let's talk about the intelligence of the actual the day of the battle, or the battlefield itself.
Sure.
Talk to us a little bit about that. As you can see, guys, me and Andrew are going to go back and forth because we did all the research, so we're going to both try to sound really smart.
Yeah, Google was our friend.
No Wikipedia though; it's not considered an official source.
There you go. So kind of Pointe Du Hoc was an interesting place, not only because it divided two beaches and obviously there were pretty heavy emplacements up on top, but it was actually the highest point of the Atlantic Wall in that whole, I think we were saying about 1,200 miles. So obviously it was a point of pretty significant geological and geographical importance. the wall at the time was the single largest civil engineering project in history. It wasn't just a military operation. The Germans actually paid French civilians to help build the wall, in money, but also in food, because obviously there were pretty severe shortages.
Right.
So we have this 1,200-mile long concrete wall that varies in height, but is ringed with guns and trenches and troops and artillery pieces. Obviously, the Allies know they have to get through this to invade Europe.
Right.
So that sets the stage for kind of the assault and where we're at. Omaha and Utah beaches, the two American beaches on the western flank of the Allied invasion. From right to left, you had Gold, which is the British beach, Juno, which was Canadian, Sword, which was British again, and then we had Omaha and Utah. Utah's the farthest west flank, I believe, and then Omaha there in the middle.
Right. Yeah. And guys, and it's a big not a misconception, but I think it's just something that's not known by a lot of people is the scale and the size of Operation Overlord was massive. I mean, everyone always thinks because of the movies and because of media and because of books that it was the Americans invading, but you had Canadian soldiers, you had British soldiers, you had all these free countries that were part of the Allied forces that had their own little piece, and they had some really. If you guys ever get a chance, if you have not seen it, to watch The Longest Day, there's a Sean Connery's in it. He does the entire portion of the British invasion. There is a part that shows Pointe Du Hoc, but it shows you the grand scale of this invasion.
Yep.
And how massive it was.
It was I think the single largest gathering of to that point of naval forces in history. I mean,
yeah, Spanish Armada didn't have shit on this thing.
Exactly. I think it was I saw a fact that there were more ships at Normandy than there were in the world when the Spanish Armada occurred.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, that's and you think about it, and that's even comparing that to the great massive naval battles in World War II that happened in the Pacific. You've got this massive thing. I mean, we had so many different countries involved that the guys we're talking about today were not even put ashore by U.S. boats. And they were put ashore by British boats because we were under the guidance of the British commandos. And so, therefore, the British were pretty much, we were op-tempoed or op-conned, if you will, to the British.
Yep. And I mean, and the other thing, I mean, just going back to kind of the relationship, it was, an American, overseeing Allied command in Europe, but under him were Americans who, had some control over, parts of the invasion, but the British oversaw, by and large, the entire naval fleet because, I mean, Britain, going back to the Spanish Armada, they were the naval power, and they understood naval operations better than anybody else because it was how they defended their home.
Right. And if we had a British guy on the show right now talking, he would argue and would have good arguments as to why was Eisenhower in charge rather than Montgomery. And maybe someday in the future we'll do a show about Montgomery, but this man was just as capable of leading the Allied forces as Eisenhower was. Eisenhower was chosen by all three because of his ability to politic his way through all these different personalities and to be able to handle and give out missions to people so as not to offend. Where Montgomery was well known to be very, British, the British rule and the Brit, he took the war in Europe as the British people's, it's their job to destroy. So he took so much on himself that Churchill was all about, hey, Montgomery, you're going to get all my British guys killed. Because you think you have to do it all. Where Eisenhower, he's going to look at this as more of a political, and he's got to handle you, and he's got you can't handle Patton, you can't handle guys like that. I mean, those guys are going to walk all over you. So there was a lot of different now it was NATO for all intents and purposes without a NATO force.
I was going to say it's like, and Monty reminds me more of MacArthur than anybody else, just based on the brilliance, but at the same time an unbelievable level of arrogance.
Yeah, he was good and he knew he was good.
Yep, exactly. So that's enough of that digression.
How about the French underground? Let's you want to talk a little bit about how much they helped with the intel gathering, because other than aerial flights over top which changed all the time because of the bombing campaigns we had.
Mhm.
We had no way of knowing where certain things were on the ground up there, so we relied
Yep.
heavily on these
On
guys,
the
the French.
resistance fighters. And I mean, it's the French resistance is another one of those interesting um, things that you could do a whole show on. I mean, they didn't exist in 1940, and by 1944, they were an absolutely invaluable asset um, to the whole Allied invasion. Um, the French actually provided intelligence on everything from pacing out how far apart lines of trenches, tanglefoot, barbed wire were between gun emplacements. But they also were able to give a pretty accurate report of the garrison that was at Pointe Du Hoc. They put it at about 135 infantry and about 135 artillery troops
Right,
on top of the point.
and just so we understand it, the artillery troops are guys who are running the artillery guns, but they pick up a Mauser and they are just as capable as infantrymen as those
Absolutely.
infantry troops are.
Yep. And I mean, exactly. And, push comes to shove, like you said, everybody's picking up a gun. Nobody wants to be overrun. And there were, again, a not insignificant number of troops of questionable fortitude.
Right, yeah, I'm sure.
Thinking about the Australian troops, but they, that there was a core there of hardened, aggressive, stalwart troops that were going to be a potentially a pretty big issue for the Rangers coming up.
Yeah, there was definitely a difference in the German military that a lot of people don't know about. Is not every single member of the German military was SS or Nazi.
Yep.
They were not all members of the Nazi Party. The SS, which was I guess you could say they were the special operations branch, or
They were the elite troops.
the
I mean,
elite
they were the
troops, the true believers of the Nazi ideals. They had to be members of the Nazi Party. They had to fall in line with the Aryan ideals. The Ubermensch idea was all based on these guys, and
all that horse shit.
yeah, all that bullshit horse shit that friggin' that was stolen from other cultures that the Nazis did. But the bottom line was there was regular army units in the German army that were not true believers. These were a lot of the units that stuck around that still exist today from back then, and they were guys who were probably quicker to hey, I ain't ate in about 2 weeks. Why the hell should I die for some crazy Nazi back there who is off doing horrible things to people? Because I'm a real big believer in there. You can't be a member of the German society in the 40s and not know what was going on back in Germany.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and I think that the other thing that bears mentioning is those troops that weren't all that excited about being there. There was a very real concern among German high command that they were just going to surrender. So part of the doctrine of the defense was there's going to be a true believer German non-com standing behind the questionable troops with a pistol in their hand, and if anybody turns and runs, they're going to get one.
And for a lot of you guys that maybe were a part of the invasion of Iraq, as I was, these would be like the Fedayeen, which were the people who, even beyond the Republican Guard, which were the special operations or the elite branch of the Iraqi military. You had these Fedayeen, which were these people totally devoted to Saddam, who would come out and in the same way, they'd be the ones there with a gun, say, "You're not going to give up. You're going to go out there and fight." Didn't work out for them either, though.
Nope. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the kind of the overall intel and the approach, the kind of setting the stage for the actual D-Day.
Well, real quick, just because I wanted to throw it in there, I did read about a French resistance blind guy who was a piano player. He actually helped out by being able, because he was blind and a piano player, was very good at understanding numbers and how to count distances between things. And the French resistance used this guy to carry. They would let this guy carry food and water up because he was blind. So the Germans were like, he's not going to be able to see what we have up here. So therefore, he's not going to go back and tell the resistance. But the resistance was like, fine, you can't see anything. But what you can do is you'll be able to tell where the trenches are. So pace out the distance between trenches so that we can pass that information back. And this man was utilized to trace the difference between tangle and barbed wire trenches that were up there on top. This was intel that was invaluable to the American and the other Allied plans for the area. So, all right, morning of June 6, 1944, as we said earlier, June 5th, Eisenhower gets reports from his meteorologist that weather's going to break. Now, we did have a couple weeks of bad weather. The invasion had been put off 2-3 times, but now it looks like we're going to have good weather, and So, and we'll stick with you, Andy.
And Rommel's on vacation.
And, and
Yep.
Rommel's on vacation. So, the time is now. Germans are not believing it. Hitler is in the point of his career where he's starting to really get addicted to methamphetamines, and he's not
Yep.
doing such a good job of making decisions. And the Americans know this. Let's talk about what happens at about 6:50, 7:10 in the morning on June 6, 1944.
Sure. So I think H hour was like 6:50 a.m. Basically nothing went to plan. The tides and the currents off the Allied invasion beaches were significantly stronger than was originally expected. So everything basically went sideways. Instead of landing at exactly 6:50 like they were supposed to, they were about 20 minutes late, the Rangers. But they get there, and about 220, it's exactly 225 Rangers from Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot companies as the 2nd Ranger Battalion make a landing on the beach under small arms fire, but also grenades and some shelling right at the base of the cliffs at Pointe Du Hoc. During the landing, one of the landing craft swamped and sank, which resulted in the deaths of all but one of the occupants of that landing craft, and
sucks.
Which really unfortunate, especially when you're running on a shoestring to begin with.
Right.
And then another landing craft carrying supplies was damaged and sank before it even got to shore. So right off the bat, they're down troops that they really needed, and they're down gear and equipment that they're going to need to sustain the battle. However, because of their training and because of the esprit de corps, the Rangers make their way to the shoreline and begin the assault in earnest. The Germans poured down heavy and accurate MG-42 machine gun fire. If you haven't seen an MG-42 fire, either in person or on YouTube, go Google it. We'll wait.
Yeah, but guys, you've got to see this thing. You're talking about 1,200 rounds a minute. It is the highest rate of fire machine gun in the history of the world, and still to this day holds that record.
Yep, and is still in use by some former Eastern Bloc countries. I mean, it's an unbelievable piece of engineering.
And you've all seen it. And when I mean you've all seen it, if you watch Star Wars, the original Star Wars, you will watch the scene where Chewbacca grabs the big long gun inside the prison block from Han Solo, and he's fighting in the prison. This is before the bowcaster. That weapon he is firing is nothing more than a MG-42 that is being used for the movies.
Yep, absolutely. So in the face of all this fire, they begin to scale the cliffs. Kind of the cool technology thing that's going on here with the Rangers that helped them get the grapples up this 100-foot cliff. So they actually had rocket-propelled grappling hooks that they launched from the boats on landing. Now, most of the rockets didn't quite make it up, but the ones that did hit dirt and stuck. The other cool thing about these is that they were actually disguised to look like grenades, so that the Germans didn't just run up and try to flip them over.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
They cleared away.
Brilliant. I mean, I'm sure that there was probably moments where they were cut away after they realized these things weren't blowing up, but the fact that it kept them away from them at first, it was a brilliant idea. I mean, the use of psychological operations and unconventional tactics during these World War II battles is phenomenal.
It's absolutely amazing, and it makes all the difference in the world. One of the other cool things is that obviously this is a 100-foot cliff. They just came in. They're assaulting from the sea, so they're wet. The seas were rough, so they are seasick. They're tired. The anti-seasickness pills that the Allies handed out were worse than Benadryl when it comes to making you drowsy.
Oh yeah, they are.
So they needed something else. The London Fire Department had 100-foot ladders, and they took these 100-foot ladders, and they were extending ladders like you see on a modern fire truck, and they stuck them on the back of the ducks, some of the amphibious landing craft, and they extended them up basically to within kind of a short hop of the top of the cliff. So they're scrambling up the cliffs. It took, I think that the fact that we saw about how quickly they were able to assault up the cliffs was the first Rangers were on top of the cliffs in 10 minutes after hitting the beach.
Yeah, that to me is the most impressive thing about the entire thing. You're talking about, and if you guys haven't seen a 100-foot cliff, that's bad enough. But these cliffs weren't just 100 feet tall. These things were sheer, and they
Yep.
were sheer, and there were parts of them, especially towards the top, where they were reversed. They were actually jutting out a little bit. So the last 50 so feet was actually over almost like an overhang that they had
Yep.
to come up. So that, which gave them a little bit of an advantage when they got up underneath that overhang from the German shooting down on them. But they had to climb almost backwards up these ropes to be able to get up there, and they did all this in 10 minutes. And that is 100% a result of the Isle of Wight training that Colonel Rudder had these guys do leading up to this mission.
And I think that the other thing that blows my mind about the two things. One, they weren't pure rock either. The bombardment and the shelling from kind of the lead up to the assault had dislodged a tremendous amount of clay and rubble from the top, which then got wet and then made the surfaces that they were climbing even slicker.
Right.
So and this is where I think it's so fascinating. Now we have all sorts of gear that would make this, the climbing the cliffs, I'm not going to say easy, but easier.
Right, yeah. We have ascending devices and all kinds of different stuff that they didn't have back then.
But they did it freehand.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they did it freehand. You're talking about the difference between a guy nowadays who climbs Mount Everest and talks about how badass he is compared to the fact that Hillary climbed it with no oxygen and no ropes. That's the difference of what we're talking about.
I think that, for me at least, this is the most incredible part of, in my opinion, all of D-Day. This act of will to take this position is just staggering. Common wisdom, conventional logic is going to say that you can't do it, but clearly,
it wasn't just common wisdom, wasn't?
Yep.
There were actually leaders, to include a Ranger commander, who thought this was an insane and unwinnable task. There was a naval commander that said something about 3 old women with brooms could keep the Rangers from climbing that cliff. And then I know you had told me that there was a Ranger commander that got relieved. Go ahead and tell me about that guy.
Yeah. So the night before the assault was slated to go off, so this is the night of June 2nd, the guy who was actually going to have tactical command of the assault had too much to drink and started spouting off about how this was a suicide mission. It wasn't worth doing. The guns probably weren't even there, and there was no reason to do it. Needless to say, he was relieved. And that's why Rudder actually commanded the assault. So it's unbelievable to think that, even among their own, there were people who thought they couldn't do it, but they did it anyway.
No, that's the Ranger way, man. That is the Ranger way. So these guys get up there. Oh, and before we go on, let's just be clear that gentleman who was the commander of the Rangers that was relieved in place, he got drunk, guys. He ran his mouth a little bit. He got fired. That guy went on to win a Distinguished Service Medal, which is the second highest award for battles that occurred later on. So this guy wasn't no pussy-ass schlep, and he was just a guy that had too much to drink and ran his mouth.
Made a mistake.
Yeah, so these guys get to the top of the hill, and let's talk about when they get to the top of the hill. What happens?
The guns aren't there.
What?
They're not there.
What? So, yeah, the Rangers get up to the top of these hills. They run into these embankments, and what do they find? They find telephone poles covered with camo netting. Uh-oh.
We did all that for nothing.
All that for nothing. But maybe not for nothing, because we know these guns are here. So, they get up to the top of this hill, right? The Rangers still believe the guns are somewhere in the area. They know this because they believe the French resistance. They had OSS, which was American predecessors to Green Berets, who were on the ground with these French resistance fighters. They were absolutely 100% believing that they said that these guns were there. These 155 millimeter howitzers were there. They may not have been right there where they thought they were going to be, but they knew they weren't far because it wasn't too long ago that they were actually They were actually photoed doing gun drills. So they had seen that these guns were up there firing. They knew they were there.
And they were there not too long before the invasion.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about days. We're talking about days in advance. So they knew that there was something fishy going on and that these guns had been moved. And maybe these guns had been moved because Rommel was on vacation. Who knows? I mean, the bottom line is there is no spoiler here. We had no idea why they were moved. No one ever found out. They just knew that they were moved. And what was put in place were these, fake guns. And when you think about it, it very well may have been to offset the Allied bombing raids. Maybe they were placed there. If they're going to bomb and try to blow these things up, these guns are massively important. We will move these guns to a different location, maybe still be able to hit the target, maybe not have eyes on, but it is an artillery piece, so it doesn't have to be direct fire. It can be indirect. So we'll move them to another location, hide them, and the Allied forces can continue to bomb these telephone poles, and that's what I think is actually what happened. The Rangers, much like the airborne guys had done after they, misplaced them, they break down into these small groups and they start the systematic search of the area for the missing guns. Here's something that I think is just absolutely crazy. We talk about they break down into small groups and systematically go search. That sounds like everything is over with, and now let's just go look for this missing stuff. Guys, they were doing this while there was still a massive battle going on. I mean, there are guys still trying to get on the beaches. There are people still fighting up on top. They've got counter attacks that are starting to build and come at them, and they decide they've got to send out these small little groups. And so you have to send out a small group that can move around and not be seen. So they break these guys down into groups of 3 men. And one of these groups was 2 Rangers and a Ranger First Sergeant by the name of Leonard Lommel. And these guys go off on their way, and they follow this. What they're doing is they're walking around, and they run across what looks like 2 giant marks in the ground. And one of the Rangers, who used to work at on a farm in West Virginia, I believe, said, that looks like cartwheels. And he goes, whatever they're dragging in those carts is really heavy. So, First Sergeant Leonard Lommel, being smart, says, all right, well, then let's go ahead and walk this and see where it goes to. And they follow these tracks about 1.2 miles inland, start to realize that they're starting to see a higher number of Nazis running around, or Germans running around, to the point where they've got to actually hide in this hedgerow. They jump into this hedgerow. They're hiding in the hedgerow. This unit of Germans passes them, obviously a reinforcement to the front lines. They're on their way to fight their fellow Rangers. On the other side of this hedgerow, they find this giant apple orchard. And what is sitting right in the middle of the apple orchard? 6 155 millimeter howitzers. If you guys have ever seen an apple orchard, you're talking about rows of trees. In each one of these rows was sitting these guns. These things were trained in 2 different directions. One direction was facing Omaha Beach. One direction was facing Utah Beach. They were loaded and ready to go. And here's the problem. At some point, the Germans who are operating these guns are going to get here and start firing these shells down onto the beaches. And we had still not gotten a foothold. But there's Germans everywhere. So First Sergeant Lommel and these other 2 Rangers, they know that they've got to disable these weapons. And this is not like recent days where we have a radio and we call someone, get somebody up here to help us out. These guys are by themselves, probably no radio contact to anybody. We've seen Band of Brothers. They go up and they hit those artillery units. They're jumping, C4 and TNT down into the barrels to blow the thing apart. But they knew that they were there. So making a giant explosion isn't a big deal. These guys had to try to find some way to disable these guns and hopefully do it in a manner to where they would survive the incident by being undetected.
Yep.
Enter the thermite incendiary grenade. Now, this was a brand new technology for the time, and it's actually a technology we don't even use nowadays anymore. And it was a mixture of an iron compound and some kind of metal aluminum compound that when they were mixed together inside this grenade, they got such a high amount of energy output, burned so hot, that they melted the metal ore and pretty much created a giant weld. And so they used these thermite grenades, which I think each Ranger had two grenades and 2 thermite grenades on them during the assault. So they had, each one of these guys, you had 6 guns, 3 Rangers, 6 grenades. They dropped one of these grenades down the barrels of each one of these guns. And these guys friggin' disabled these guns without making one bit of noise. And these guys did this and made it back to Colonel Rudder without being detected, which I think is pretty impressive.
Remarkable.
I mean, and it's not impressive because they were able to save their own lives. I really do believe, and I've seen interviews with, First Sergeant Lommel, and they were prepared to do whatever they needed to do to disable those weapons. It just was a nice bonus that they were able to do it and live to tell the story of how they did it. because it was really important. And I really wish I knew who the other two Rangers were. I'd give them their names too. But First Sergeant Leonard Lommel, cheers, brother. I mean, good job getting that stuff. Getting that stuff disabled, because I really do believe that as many people we did lose on D-Day, I think you saved, maybe, in my opinion, you may have saved the Allied invasion of France.
If they got those guns in the fight, there's no way.
No, we barely got. I mean, we talk about a big victory, it was, but it was a victory by the skin of our teeth. It really was.
Yep. Until they really got going and moving inland, it was, for most of the day, it was completely in doubt.
Right. So, mission success, right? So this is all within the first couple hours of landing, getting up there. But guys, this story isn't over.
Oh no.
What happens? And before we go into what Andrew's going to talk about next, I'm going to set the scene for you. We just talked about how much they barely got a foothold in the beach. It was so close of a thing that they were going to lose that beach, that Colonel Rudder made a command decision to push the 5th Ranger Battalion and the remainder of 2nd Ranger Battalion, who were still off the coast as the reinforcements and the follow-on force. He pushes them to Utah Beach to help seize the beachhead. Now,
didn't they get pushed to Omaha?
It might have been Utah? Yeah, maybe it was one or the other.
Omaha.
It was one or the other, but yeah, I'm looking at it right now. You are right. It was Omaha, but anyway, he pushes them off. He allows them to go, knowing that they're not going to be there to support him. They just got their mission accomplished, but the Germans are just as they understand just as well how important this ground is. So now they're coming to try to take it back.
Yeah. So D-Day doesn't end on D-Day. Everybody always focuses on June 6th. June 7th and June 8th, they were still fighting, and they were still fighting around Pointe Du Hoc. The Germans made constant counterattacks from the time the Rangers landed, all the way through D+2, so the morning of June 8th, 1944. Constant counterattacks with artillery, machine guns. I mean, the gamut. They had it all, and the Rangers had, by and large, BARs, M1 Garins, and
Tommy
pistols.
Guns. Tommy guns, yeah.
Yep. So this wasn't a force that was designed or really meant to hold out against heavy counterattack.
No,
the plan was
they were based off the commandos. They were a raiding force.
Yep. Take ground, hold it for long enough to be, relieved, and then move on with your lives. But that clearly didn't happen. It took 2 days for the kind of the main body of troops to make it to the point. Basically, what ends up happening is the German counterattack pushes the 2nd Rangers all the way back to the cliff edge. And this is where the fact that the Germans thought that the assault was going to come from land after the invasion actually works in the favor of the Rangers who attacked. The Rangers actually ended up using the original German positions.
Yeah, their original fighting positions to prove.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Jeff before was talking about the concrete structures that the Germans had built. There were machine gun nests that they called Tobrücks, which are basically subterranean concrete bunkers that a machine gunner can stick his head out of and run his gun. They fell back to those. They fired from those. They fired from the trenches. They fired from the bunkers. They used the German positions as well, if not better, than the Germans had planned to. And that's one of the only reasons, other than kind of the tenaciousness of the Ranger Battalion, that the point was able to be held. At the morning of D+2, June 8, there were only 90 combat effectives. 135 Rangers died during the assault and the subsequent counterattack by German forces.
That is baffling loss of men. I mean, the fact that that morning that there were 90 and those 90 were still. Now we're talking about 90 guys who can still fight. And guys, yep. So you understand what we mean by this. Nowadays, I've seen guys medevac for a bad cut or they got sick. We have we have the ability to do that, so it's okay. It's not something that has anything to do with them. But you're talking about guys who can you still aim a weapon and fire? I don't care if your foot's gone. I don't care if you've got 3 concussions. I don't care if you've been shot 4 times. So these are 90 guys who are on varying degrees of injury. Probably about half of those guys are medevac needed guys, but they're still fighting. So when we say there's 90 people, we're talking about 90 guys who were still able to fight, not 90 healthy Rangers.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, and I think that that's the other amazing thing here, right? I mean, these are guys who really shouldn't still be fighting, and they kept at it because it was needed to happen. I mean, that's balls of, you know, the size of the Liberty Bell. I mean, those are big cojones.
Yeah. Balls. Giant balls.
Yep. So we're talking the morning of June 8th. You know, this is 2 full days after the assault on the cliffs, and then reinforcements finally get to the Rangers. It ended up being a battalion of the 116th and the 5th Ranger Battalion and the rest of the 2nd Rangers.
So the guys that were shifted over to Omaha Beach finally link back up with their original party 2 days after. But unfortunately, it's not 225 of their brothers. It's only 90. But yet those 90 were still there. And, and guys, I'm going to tell you that, you know, if you've never sat down and really read or watched a documentary on this battle and what went on with these guys, this is phenomenal. There are a lot of stories around D-Day about what humanity is able to do when it puts itself up against blind aggression and evil. And this is one of those stories. What I want to do right now is I want to stop for a minute. I want you guys to hear something that comes to us from June 6, 1984. There's a U.S. president named Ronald Reagan who is standing right at the spot where the first Ranger scaled the cliff. And here's part of something that he said about those Rangers and about the ones that were able to come back that day to what is now the Pointe Du Hoc Memorial.
At dawn on the morning of the 6th of June, 1944, 225 Rangers jumped off the British landing craft and ran to the bottom of these cliffs. Their mission was one of the most difficult and daring of the invasion: to climb these sheer and desolate cliffs and take out the enemy guns. The Allies had been told that some of the mightiest of these guns were here, and they would be trained on the beaches to stop the Allied advance. The Rangers looked up and saw the enemy soldiers, the edge of the cliffs, shooting down at them with machine guns and throwing grenades. And the American Rangers began to climb. They shot rope ladders over the face of these cliffs and began to pull themselves up. When one Ranger fell, another would take his place. When one rope was cut, a Ranger would grab another and begin his climb again. They climbed, shot back, and held their footing. Soon, one by one, the Rangers pulled themselves over the top, and in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe. 225 came here. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 could still bear arms. And behind me is a memorial that symbolizes the Ranger daggers that were thrust into the top of these cliffs. And before me are the men who put them there. These are the boys of Pointe Du Hoc.
Poignant words. The boys of Pointe Du Hoc and what they were able to do. Andrew, any thoughts on President Reagan's words?
Yeah, you know, I was, in all candor, 2 when this speech was given. Not even 2, but you know, it just blows me away. I think that, you know, as a kind of a student of American history, we're judged by, you know, the actions of the day and how it's portrayed later on. You know, I think that Reagan's words here, you know, that we just heard and some of the other parts of this speech are, you know, pretty good rhetoric and really get across kind of the importance and the significance of the action.
You know, and Reagan, you know, his acting ability is not, you know, he does have a way with words, and that was one of the things about his ability to be an orator. But guys, I'm here to tell you that if you ever listen to this entire speech, he talks about how the guys in the crowd who are Pointe Du Hoc Rangers, how they seem unaffected by his words and about the events. And going back to what Andrew just said, you know, I was participant in the Battle of the Dagger Pass during the invasion of Iraq, and it was kind of the same thing. You know, stuff that's said about it after the fact doesn't feel to me like it's being the way they say it and the way they describe it didn't feel like how it happened. So I'm well aware of that, the feeling of, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. But I'm also aware of the fact that that's not my decision to make, just like those Rangers. They don't realize how big of a deal it is till you have guys like us talk about and it is a big deal. What they did was amazing. It's inspiring, and it's what makes it great to be Americans, and it's really what makes it great to be soldiers. These guys saved maybe the planet from a really, really dark ending. And if you don't believe that, go catch any Philip K. Dick book and read about what his versions of what the world would have been like had the Nazis won. These guys are really the kind of people that you want to say. These are the heroes you want. These are the people who inspire Captain America. And stories like that, because this is what those stories are about. So, Andrew, I want to thank you for coming on today, man. This is a great story. It's going to be an awesome episode. And guys out there, my listeners, this isn't the end of you and me and Andrew on here.
Hell yeah.
Make sure that you guys go over and listen to Neophyte in the Woods. Andrew, go ahead and since we're on here right now, man, go ahead and hit us up with your social media stuff and tell us a little bit about your show.
Sure. So the show is about outdoors, hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, and it's taken the perspective of kind of where I'm coming from. I didn't get into hunting until I was 32. It was 2 years ago, and it's really changed the way I think about food. It's changed the way I think about the environment, and my relationship with the broader world. So that's what we're talking about on the show. And we're talking about guns. I'm not going to lie. We're going to talk about guns a lot. Jeff will be on to talk about guns.
I love what you're saying.
And we'll talk about IPSC. We'll talk about IDPA. We'll talk about shooting trap and shooting skeet and all those kind of other kind of gun sports, if you will. But that's sort of the focus of the show. We'll do gear reviews. It'll be great. I'm a geardo. You could call me queer for gear if you really wanted to. Mm-hmm. So we'll be talking about that too. We're kind of we're in production right now, trying to do interviews. So I'm hoping that by the time this airs, we'll be on the air or just about. If you want to find me, you can go to neophyteinthewoods.com for my blog. You can find me at neophyteitw on Twitter, NEOPHYTEITW. You can also find me on YouTube at Neophyte in the Woods.
Great, fantastic. Well, brother, thank you for coming on, and
thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Guys, I invite you guys to go give us some 5 stars on the iTunes. Remember, the more stars you give us and the more feedback you give us, the better the shows we're gonna give you. As a matter of fact, I invite you guys to go to jeff@changeyourpov.com. Go ahead and email me your ideas and your desires. What stories do you want to hear me and guys like Andrew come on and tell? And if there's a story you want to hear me and Andrew tell. And not a story about like how I met my wife. That's for Andrew's show. On this show we talk about man stuff. And you guys go ahead and send me your ideas. Send me in what you guys want, because this show is for you guys just as much as it's for us to run our mouths. And remember, guys, that the world is a dark place only if you let it be, and you are in complete control of yourself and everything that goes on with you. There's nobody that tells you that you can't do something except for you. And if you feel like there's something you want to do, do not wait. Get out there and do it. There is no time like the present. Go ahead and free yourself. Remember, Special Forces motto, free the oppressed, the oppressively bear, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Change Your POV and all of its shows can help and heal and even educate. We want you to help us help others. Visit our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/changeyourpov. Become a patron of our network and our mission.